Okay, let me start by the most difficult one. I don't know, I'm not quite sure how to address it immediately. The need to go kind of beyond this Europeanization literature, kind of where we're approaching. I think it's true, and of course as scholars, I think it's really something we need to do, kind of better understand kind of the new environments, even though officially the frame has not changed, right? And I think that's part of the problem, that the rules, like at the policy level, the rules of the official rules of the game for Turkey and the EU are still the same. So I think that's why, in a way, we also as scholars get sometimes stuck to this, to these things. But yeah, I mean, I think something to keep in mind indeed as we go along towards more research. The other two comments were actually really good, and it's actually something I address in other articles of mine. One is this difference between mobility and migration, and the fact that indeed migration is in many ways not really reflecting really nicely anymore the type of mobility that is actually happening in the region, both in and beyond Europe, as well as kind of in Turkey's neighborhood. Something very interesting, and I've been writing about this, is that as I was talking, and we still talk about migration and asylum policy as kind of the catch term, even though we're talking about something slightly different actually than that. And Turkey is in many ways being quite liberal, as I was mentioning, on kind of short-term migration, or kind of on mobility. Like, borders are really open, it's relatively easy to come to Turkey, to spend some time, but it's much more difficult to stay kind of beyond 3 months. So even if you're an asylum seeker, even if you're recognized as a refugee, you cannot really stay on Turkey, you have to be resettled in another country. So there is really this, in many ways, in Europe, it's very difficult to get into Europe. But once you get into, it's relatively easy to stay into Europe, and kind of the long-term policy are much more protective on that. Turkey is kind of the contrary. It's really easy to come for short-term time. It becomes more difficult to stay on the long term. The other very interesting question is kind of this relationship between those migrants, so this kind of new foreigners in Turkey, compared to the kind of historical minorities that are living in Turkey. And my take on this is, in many ways, I think it's much easier for Turkey and Turkish society to be open and tolerant to these new foreigners than it is to be for historical minorities who have always kind of been part of the Turkish society, actually. And I think a lot of this goes back to kind of the formation of Turkish nationalism over the last century, and the fact that, you know, in this understanding of Turkish nationalism, those minorities, especially the religious minorities, have always been a problem that has never been resolved. And so people kind of immediately can frame this in this nationalist framework, and this is making people uncomfortable. On these new foreigners, these migrants coming from outside, and especially because it is perceived, at least, the reality is actually different, but the perception is that they're going to stay only temporarily. It is much more open to then go into this, you know, very welcoming Turkish discourse, or, you know, this is our culture. We just open our doors to foreigners, and we're going to welcome them, and we're going to give them the best place at the table and the best bed, and etc. That said, we also, I think overall, we also see some improvements on minorities in Turkey. But indeed, I think it's a much more difficult process on that. On the other one. And may I just add something on Orientalism? It's not mine. Because this was actually a remark that Oner who will be here a little bit later, I think he made yesterday at a different panel. I'm from France. I grew up in France. I mean, I could tell you a lot about what Orientalism means in France, and how difficult it is to kind of go beyond Orientalism. And this is a very, very diffuse, very widespread thing that is, again, very difficult to overcome, even if you become aware of it. But something that kind of is related to that, and that is actually another very positive development, is, and I think, I mean, it's difficult to measure it as usual, but I think it's actually something which is increasing in Turkey, is there is a little bit of the mirror effect in Turkey as well, and that there is a tendency in Turkey to look at the West in a very caricatural way, and some people have coined that as Occidentalism, and especially when we try to think of Turkey-EU and kind of find constructive ways of really trying to build a better relationship, whatever the framework is. I think those two tendencies are really major obstacles and that we need to be overcome.
Thank you very much. This is great. We have a good 30 minutes. So floor is open now for your questions. And in order to get more participation, I will maybe start with 3 questions, and we hope that randomly all of these first questions statistically will appeal to all the 3 speakers. And also you can include Emiliano, he's part of the panel. And then I will go to another 3 people. So first 3, Juliette.
I'd like to ask a question to Juliette.
Can we have the mic here? Yeah, the first question.
I'd like to ask a question to Juliette. I'd like to use, you use the concept of critical Europeanization while explaining Turkey's discourse towards integration with the EU. This posture of critical Europeanization, in a way, is a sign of confident new Turkish political elite. But at the same time, it's externalization of Turkey's domestic debate over the relationship between religion and democracy, between modernity and religion. Do you think this critical Europeanization might have some repercussions on the European debate over Europeanization? And my second question is about Turkey's new way of Europeanizing its surrounding region. You see, Turkey is Europeanizing, quote unquote, its region, its surrounding region, by lifting visas with neighboring countries. Do you think this would be a hindrance to Turkey's integration with the EU?
Another question we can have. This is a great question. While you're thinking about, okay, I see one hand from here and one from here.
I'd like to make basically a brief comment leading into my question. First of all, the Ottomans had their own Orientalism, and this was inherited by the Turkish Republic. They had a certain Orientalism towards the Arabs and the Kurds, and they established educational institutions in Istanbul to train the sons of these Eastern elites. So also colonialism cannot only be explained, Orientalism cannot only be explained by colonialism. So where did we put, for example, Swedish Orientalism? But also, Juliette being from France, she well knows the watered-down diplomas given as Bon pour l'étranger. But also my question is, basically, when, for example, Poland was a candidate for EU accession to stem the migration, they were given technical and financial help to establish protection of the eastern borders. Why this was not given to Turkey and was offered to Greece? So my question to Juliette is, what is at the root of this lack of EU consistency when it comes to Turkey? It's a big question.
Would you please identify yourself? Sorry, I forgot.
Sorry, my name is Ercü Akman.
Okay. A third question here. I identified this gentleman first, but I will go next.
Matt Tatar. I have a question, I guess, for Ravza, but I guess also for Juliette. It's about the Orientalism generally. And what I'm interested in is maybe how that connects with the metaphor that I see more commonly activated in at least American discourse of this bridge between East and West, which is, I mean, it comes up in travel narratives, it comes up in popular journalism and things like that, and I'm wondering how that links up with an Orientalist frame.
Before you answer, I might add my comment. This morning in the hotel in Boston, I was watching TV with all these nasty comments from Barack Obama. And it's kind of, now thinking back, I mean, it seems like Turkey is the Barack Obama of Europe. I mean, it is a very, you can be very American, cosmopolitan person, and on Fox TV, it is the black, socialist, communist, Muslim Mama rebellion. And I mean, there's this kind of an interesting remnants, and of course, Emiliano asked me, why are people doing that? I mean, they know better. I mean, sometimes people are using some of the Orientalist tropes to advance another cause related to taxation, economy. It could be anything, but it is as complex as commentator mentioned. So why don't we go follow the same order based on the questions you received? Juliette, why don't you start?
Okay. I'm all over the place. Just kind of as partly a correction, I said that by having a liberal visa policy and this kind of non-visa agreements in the region, Turkey is trying to some extent replicate the kind of early European integration process. I would not go as far as to say that they're actually Europeanizing the region. I mean, the logic is there and kind of the seeds is there, but the kind of structural conditions of the region, I think, would make it very difficult for Turkey alone to kind of achieve that type of outcome. But the second part of the question was, to what extent, how is the EU looking at this, right? And how is that? And I think something very interesting is that, and of course, to some extent, it could be used as this, Turkey is now looking east and not west anymore. It's more interested in creating this kind of Middle Eastern Union as opposed to the EU, etc. But if you look really at the kind of official, reaction of the European Commission, etc., they have been amazingly silent on this issue. And initially, when Turkey started to reverse the visa policy, which was kind of a blatant, in a blatant opposition to what they were supposed to do, as going through the process of harmonization, many people were kind of expecting at least the progress report of the Commission, or some type of reaction from European institutions that look what is going on, and it has not been the case. And from having some discussions with people in Brussels, it seems that first of all, kind of Europe is kind of recognizing that on normative values, they cannot really criticize Turkey for doing that. In many ways, they have kind of good reasons for doing that. And second, I think they are looking. I mean, Turkey's European neighborhood policy actually had one of the objectives was to have kind of more liberal visa policy towards countries of the neighborhood, which they have not been able to implement. But they're kind of aware that this is something that they maybe should be doing. So I think in some extent they are looking at Turkey as a laboratory and as kind of an experiment, and kind of waiting and looking, is it going to increase insecurity problem in Turkey? Is it going to be a success? Like, in a way, Turkey is experimenting liberal visa policy in very unstable regions and not kind of natural region where you would like to try those things. So I think there is this notion of kind of looking and waiting. Because let me go to kind of the technical financial help that the EU is or is not providing to Turkey. Actually, it is providing some technical financial help. There are 6 so-called, they have different names, kind of detention centers for irregular migrants and kind of irregular asylum seekers that are currently being constructed in Turkey, and this is mainly EU funds. We don't have enough kind of data to really compare the extent to which compare the financial assistance that is provided to other countries as they were candidate countries compared to I think. It is true that there has been very much more investment in Greece, but Greece being already a member of the EU, I think it's just a different area of policy, so I think it was kind of justified on this. Turkish authorities are extremely critical that the EU, is basically asking Turkey to be both more restrictive and more welcoming on migrants. There is kind of very contradicting pressure, and that it wants to use kind of Turkey as a dumping ground. And basically wants Turkey to deal with all these irregular migrants who actually wants to go to Europe, and Turkey is extremely critical on that. And it was especially the case a couple of years ago. I think there are some, at least much more open dialogue that are happening on this, and the frames of reference have changed a little bit. So we'll have to see kind of both the new policy in Turkey as it is implemented, and the way the EU is going to react to that, exactly how the politics of this will change. And then the question to what extent this critical Europeanization could have some repercussions on European debate. I mean, I think ideally that would be the situation, right? So you come up to the situation where Europe is able to listen, to kind of hear to what Turkey has to say, not just as being this kind of undemocratic country who is just complaining for other reasons, but actually having something critical and important to say. I also think it's a little bit wishful thinking for now, but I think, I mean, we talk about many different levels of interaction, and I think there are some voices in Europe that are much more ready to hear this type of discourses, especially in countries that are more open to Turkey's membership. It will take a lot more time for France, for instance, to hear that. But I think other countries that, yeah, I mean, the UK, Spain, Poland, all countries that are much more open to Turkey's membership, who would be more likely to hear that.
Ravza?
Thank you for the question on Orientalism and